Well, a pedophilia, I think, is a reaction to child abuse that you've gone through yourself, and then for some people, they just are drawn to sexually to the children of that age in an attempt really to become the one in power. The healing takes courage, and the courage is what the perpetrators don't have. Well, that was a Rothschild. It was a Rothschild, and it felt like that was the most important person. He was clearly the most powerful in the network. There was something there that I couldn't even grasp in sense of how much power this person had and the idea of freedom that conveys. So when I was speaking about the Rothschild being not a pedophile, not everybody in the network are pedophiles, but pedophiles are the easiest to manipulate because they're stuck in a network that has stuff on them, and that's why they have the riches. And I'm not saying everybody, but enough that they keep the control, and that's why things are not getting better. So we have to go to the source of the evil to understand what's happening before we can make a change.
Anneke Lucas, welcome to be back in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
You were here 2.5 years ago to present your English book, the English edition. And you made a translation, or you have made a translation by somebody else. And yeah, maybe you can show to the camera Zoektocht naar Liefde, the Dutch version.
Yeah.
What is different in this translation compared to the English version?
Yeah.
Because there were some challenges, you told me.
Well, I want to say it is a very beautiful translation. It is, you know, I also love the way the book looks. Actually, I love it looks a little different, obviously. You know, I love the colors of this book and the simplicity. The font is the same, and the print is better than the English. And you know, it is longer. I guess Dutch is a different language in that sense, and obviously, yes, we worked very closely together. And what is really important, and especially Dutch is maybe the most important translation, Dutch and French. Being that I'm from Belgium. But what is really important for me is that so I'm a writer, so when I put my story down, that's what I do, that's what I love to do. And so I feel that the balance in the extreme nature of my story, the balance comes from hopefully the beauty of the language, so that the literary quality brings you, sort of guides you as a reader, that when you're a sensitive person, you don't want to be smacked over the head with horrific things. So so that in this translation also there's this beautiful sensitivity and depth that you really get, feel, I believe, as a reader, that you are held and guided. And at the same time, because of the rhythm and the beauty of the language, you get a little balance of beauty with even things that are difficult to stomach.
Yeah, to also give space for the love and the compassion that is also part of the story that you wrote down. And it does read like a novel. It was a page turner if you're interested in this topic. It is an easy book to read because you're really drawn into the story. What you also explained to me is that you had to moderate a little bit in regards to the introduction, in regards to the Dutroux case. When you were a little girl, you were abused in a network that was much later on known as the Marc Dutroux network. And you also had to use pseudonyms to hide the names. Maybe you can speak a little bit about that.
I did for the Dutch version is just, well, what I left out. I did write about the Dutroux case in the introduction, but there's no perpetrator names in there. And of course, that's a conscious choice. And it really isn't about the names, anyway. It really isn't about that. I think it detracts mostly from, because if the focus is very much on the names, then it really takes away from what I think is important that we know.
Yes. And also the insights in how is this system set up, why is it set up, and how can we break out of it?
Exactly, yeah. Which is a larger issue. Not that saying the names is not important. It is at some point. It's important also just because those people were there. And, but it is a fallacy to think that naming names is going to bring accountability. I don't know why anybody would think that if I now, little me is going to say a name of an extremely powerful person in the world. I don't know how anybody thinks that is going to make a difference. Other than that, they're going to have a name. And then, my first question is, what are you going to do with that name? Probably absolutely nothing. And what do you think is going to happen? That person is not going to be brought to justice. And the people that want to hear the name, they're not going to help bring that person to justice. And to put all the responsibility for the crimes really with the victims once more, pushing the victims to say names of people is ridiculous.
Do you feel there's too much pressure on
of course,
survivors to...
Always. There's much too much pressure on survivors. It's, in this climate where we're being asked especially to name the names, we're being made responsible for everything. And I hear it quite a lot. If you don't name those names, you are responsible for all the victims that this person is making now.
Or somebody blames you for just naming names of people that have deceased and cannot defend themselves. And
if they were alive, they wouldn't, it's not like it wouldn't be different if they were alive. Yeah. Because if they're, this idea that if they're deceased, they can't defend themselves, but they've been defending themselves their whole life. That's why they weren't named while they were alive. Yeah. If they were defenseless, there would be no problem in naming them in the first place. Yeah. They have a whole defense system set up around them. To everything that is done in the network felt that was making sure about me not speaking. And in this, for all the victims, it's the same. Everything is set up so that you will never speak out. So when you then do start to speak out, it takes so much to start to speak out.
There is also little regard in that respect of the power difference between the
exactly, that's what I mean.
The networks and in your situation, it's just you.
Exactly. I don't have a team around me, it's very important to keep that in mind, not to believe that it's very naive to think that anything's going to change with naming names. Now, it is important in the long run. It is important. It's just because those people were the ones that were there. It's not everybody who's famous. It's not everybody who's a politician. It's not everyone that's doing this. So in that sense, it's also important not to just generalize and think that it's everyone in the elite, or it's, you know, that's also not correct. It's not everyone. But at the same time, you know, don't put all the responsibility with the victims in terms of, you know, to suggest that I'm responsible for the crimes of my former perpetrators is absolutely ludicrous. It's not my responsibility to do anything. It's not my responsibility to speak to you today. I don't have any responsibility. I survived, you know.
Yet you have an enormous drive to bring this story out, and I think it's important that this story comes out, because we need to have a better understanding of how the power structure works. And yeah, you explained also a little bit about what makes it impossible to break out of it. Why can't we bring this to justice? Can you explain a little bit about how that works?
I think there's some examples of that in Holland, but for me, and I think I might have mentioned this in our previous interview, but that's okay. But for me, the way that I was treated in the network, and I'm speaking now about Belgium because I had two phases, you could say. I had a phase in the Belgian network, and then I had a phase, 1 year, in sort of what I call the core global network. But in the Belgian network, specifically, it was made very clear that if I were to say anything to anyone, that it would always come back to them. And I knew that there was a head of police. I knew that there was somebody from the judiciary. I knew that there was somebody in the bureaucracy of the government. I knew that there were politicians, but I didn't know who these people were, but it was clear enough that the people that were there, so I'm a little girl, 6 years old when I got in, and there are these extremely important people, and they're telling me that if I speak to anybody at all, that anybody, it's always going to get back to them, and no matter what, that not only I would be punished, but whoever I speak to would also be punished, and in their framework, punishment often means death. And then, you know, that proved to be rather correct, that indeed anybody you might speak to, there's somebody that's going to block the investigation at some point. And so I went to the police 20 years after the facts. I went to the police in Antwerp, and I thought I'm going to start naming the pimp that first brought me to the network. It was a Dutch man who was a working class man, and it was a couple. They worked for the network, and they had infiltrated in our family. And of course later my mother took over from these pimps. But okay, in the beginning there was this man, and he had raped me. So I thought I'll go and report this to the police and see what happens. And so, first of all, I was completely ridiculed by the policeman for coming so late.
Did you speak to a woman, or did you have to address this to a man?
So the man who first saw me, who was going to take the report, was completely ridiculing me for the fact that I'm 20 years late. And he was extremely disrespectful. And then he had me speak to a woman who was extremely sensitive and nice about it. So when I was reading my report, but because of the way that the man acted towards me and how derisive he was, there's no way that I was gonna, you know, and this is about somebody that nobody knows.
Right. There's no threat to the
right.
network.
So I was thinking, you know, like the other, am I going to say anything else? Well, obviously I wasn't going to say anything else.
But you did speak to the policemen that were involved in the Dutroux case.
Yes, but about that one time when I went to the police station and I reported, at the end that man said, that male policeman said, "Oh, we probably have a file on him here. We'll just put it in the file. We'll probably have a file on him here." And I thought, wow, the way he talks about that, it seems like anybody comes to report something like that, they just stuff it in a file. And he didn't seem to, he seemed to indicate that this just gets filed away and nothing gets done. And then, yes, of course, more recently, so during the Dutroux case, I was in the network before Dutroux, so I never saw Dutroux. Then the Dutroux case, I learned from the Dutroux case from the New York Times when the judge was fired, who was sincere and wanted to make a difference. So it was amazing when I learned of it, because emotionally, when I learned of the Dutroux case, I'd been having flashbacks for almost 10 years. But I never had found a therapist that would really take that in. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of left alone with these flashbacks, and I was struggling because I didn't want to believe that this was real. And at the same time, I didn't have a context. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that anything like this existed. Mm-hmm. So how, you know, so what was happening to me, it's like I didn't want to believe that I was crazy, but I also didn't want to, and I didn't speak about this because, you know, I was afraid that maybe I was crazy, that this was just happening to me and I was not, you know, I was losing it. So when the Dutroux case happened, suddenly there wasn't a context. Mm-hmm. And of course, on some level, I knew that not only am I not crazy, but I knew that, on some level, I knew that it was true. But when you have no reflection from the outside, it's very difficult, it's very confusing. The flashbacks were not saying, sometimes you have a flashback and it's just, you just know that it's true. Because flashbacks come in all different ways. So the way that my flashbacks were coming, it was just all this information that I was in these situations that were absolutely horrific, that I didn't want to believe were true. But the Dutroux case then suddenly gave the context. And what was really amazing about the Dutroux case, everything was happening at once. There was an incredible confirmation for flashbacks that I'd been having for almost 10 years. I'd been working in therapy on sexual abuse, child sexual abuse, but the therapists were not open to this more extreme abuse. And now suddenly what I learned from the Dutroux case, that was the white marches. So 300,000 people were in the streets of Belgium, and I felt that they were walking for me. Mm-hmm. So there was this incredible confirmation, and then this support that was there, and this hope that welled up inside of me. This was so emotional. Mm-hmm. But the judge had been fired.
Right.
So also,
that whole process was compromised.
It was already compromised.
Right.
And so I followed it, and then sometime later, though, I learned about the ex-witnesses. Mm-hmm. So I had not any idea to go to Belgium or anything like that. I wasn't in Belgium. But then when I was in Belgium, I met some people that were involved in working to spread this news, to spread this information. And then I believe when the X-Files had been separated from the Dutroux case, the articles were coming out about the ex-witnesses. So then I ended up speaking to a survivor once, who then asked me, "Are you gonna, go public?" And I just knew, no, I'm not ready.
Did you see how this survivor was treated and...
Yes, I was at an event in Belgium, and it was a debate at the time between the believers and the non-believers. And so there was a journalist, Paul Deltour, was the non-believer, and Douglas de Koning was the believer. Well, that's how people were called. So Douglas de Koning wrote a book called The X-Files, What Belgium Was Not Supposed to Know About the Dutroux Case. And he was, you know, so it was a debate, and it was in a cafe, very Belgian. And I was there, I happened to be there that time. And then this non-believer journalist was so familiar, because the survivor was there, and he was so familiar, and it was, and I just knew that I would not ever want to be treated that way, and I couldn't, you know, if I would be treated that way, I would need to be ready. So that meant I had to heal to a point where I didn't need the love from the people that would support me, and I would not be fazed by the attacks. Mostly I felt I have to be ready for the attacks, but you also have to be ready for the love, because the love and the support that you receive, if you're still insecure inside, then that translates into, gives you status and power. And really, all the network needs is that you have that insecurity and that you need that lift from the outside. Because if you need power, well, that's what they have to give you or to take away from you. And that's when you're vulnerable. So I knew I need to get past that. I need to not be vulnerable to that. I need to be strong within myself, to not need anything from the outside, to be ready for the attacks, of course, but also be ready for the love, which then gives you, the support gives you the power. The love, of course, you just receive it, and hopefully you can receive it, because it's very beautiful. But when you need that love to give yourself some esteem that you don't really have yet, then you become again vulnerable to the attacks, because it goes together.
Right.
So,
can you speak a little bit about the credibility? Because here in the Netherlands, survivors are severely attacked, and their credibility is attacked. They're called delusional. Yet at the same time, when there is a court case and the victim is about to speak, then they turn off the camera. So there is something there that they don't want out there. But what is your experience in regards to this topic?
Yep. Yeah, so that's why I wanted to wait so long and to speak out. I mean, first of all, I didn't know if I'd ever speak out at first, you know, because this is something, you know, it's enough to deal with first, and you know, and again, this was just a confirmation for me in that time of the Dutroux case. It was just a confirmation now that my flashbacks were maybe real, but I still hadn't. I mean, when I was in Belgium, I was accepting it, and by that time I also had found a therapist, thankfully, that would hear me and that could work with me. So I was finally working on these things. I was working through them, and at that time it was so difficult. I was, you know, it's really working through these kinds of memories, working through that horror. It was so difficult to even like get through the day. Because it's so heavy and it's so painful, and you're barely functional. And I had to go into New York City, I mean from Brooklyn into Manhattan basically, to go to therapy, and I was going many days in the week, and it was so hard because you just getting on the subway and everything, the idea of having to do anything, you just want to be in bed, and you just want to, you know, hide. You just want to, you know, you just want to disappear really, because it's just so difficult, so heavy. And it is also what makes you know that it really happened, like you're feeling. So you have these flashbacks and you can't really know that they're real. So the credibility first has to come within yourself. Hi, Poos. Hello. Hi. Hi. Yeah. No, and I'll keep talking about it because it's such an important thing. Like I understand that for some people it's unbelievable, because first for me it was unbelievable as well. I didn't want to believe it, and I don't think anybody wants to really think of themselves as such a victim either. You know, your life works, and even if I wasn't doing very well. I cannot say that I was doing very well, but then these you get hit with these flashbacks. Well, I didn't want that to be true, and I didn't want the incest to be true either, you know. But once first it comes, and then, you know, it makes sense. Certain things start to really make sense in your life, because there's a narrative, you know, that I had adopted, which was the narrative from my parents, and of course, the narrative that the people in the network had imposed on me. Then nothing happened, and my mother was perfect. So that was the narrative, and of course that's not working well for me. It doesn't make me very, a thriving human being at all. And there was so much dissociation, and I was constantly reliving something emotionally, not physically, thankfully. So once I was in therapy, things started to make sense, and it was very, however painful it was, there were insights that were coming in this process. So as I was feeling the pain, and as I was grieving the loss and the betrayals, and, you know, because it is just the worst. It's the worst. It's all about the child's attachment. I mean, I was attached to these people. I loved these people. And then I have to find out that they were so horrific with me, and that they were not right, that it was not my fault. And that really is the process always, like going with the part that has been that has been given the blame, and being with it and giving that new perspective that no, you were a child, it was not your fault, you did not have the responsibility for all this evil that happened. And then, you know, working through that, and then finding the insights, and then finding, as you're integrating, that life does start to work better. It may seem like it's getting worse because you're carrying so much at that time, and
you're cleaning up.
Well, the cleanup for me lasted more than 20 years. It was so heavy. So I was in therapy from the late 80s, and the healing continues today. But
Did you ever heal from this?
Well,
fully?
Healing is relative, yeah. First, I think in the general sense, you would say that I'm healed. But
Not completely in every aspect.
Well, it's like this.
You mentioned this yesterday.
No, but I'm not only am I functional, I am thriving. Mm-hmm. And that cannot happen when you make things up. So when you're fantasizing things, and sometimes this happens, you know, people fantasize things, they give themselves some kind of importance or something, mm-hmm. and some kind of attention. Well, if you do that, then your life does not get better. You don't become more functional. You don't become more clear right. about things. You don't, you know, the clarity that I have and the ability to speak about this issue with the eloquence that I have comes from the work that I've done and the clarity that I've received about my own situation and my own trauma. And that's, you know, if I speak about trauma and I know about trauma and I give workshops to people about healing from trauma, that is all because of my own experience of healing and the clarity I gained from it. And so this is for me, my process. But then healing is a spiritual thing for me. So it began with opening to commitment to the process of therapy as a first sort of like opening to something greater than the ego, because the ego is so wounded. You know, I was just stuck within it and, you know, not able to think there's anything greater just because it's so wounded. You know, that's the atheistic state. And then I had to give myself, let's say, a surrender to the process of therapy. That was the first opening. And that already was this huge step to take. I didn't want to trust anything. But to commit, I had to. So, because I had, you know, my therapist made me make a commitment. And I'd already had an experience.
And the commitment was that you would come in every week?
Yeah, every week. And I'd already had an experience where I felt there's truth. It was for me, when I opened emotionally, and so the heart breaks, you know, because you don't want it to be true, so your heart breaks. But with that feeling of the heartbreak, I got the sense there's truth. And that for me was the first time in my life that I felt that something was true. So I'm going to follow that, I said. And then that led me, you know, but it's spiritual in that even accepting the process of therapy as a higher power, there's always that reliance on something greater than yourself, which then leads to, led me on a spiritual journey. There was a time when my, you could say the guilt complex that I suffered from got healed. And that was in 2013, and that's when I felt ready finally to speak out. And this happened very organically. I didn't try to, you know, say, no, I'm gonna, here I am, everybody.
You were asked for a video documentary or something?
No, not at all. I was giving an article, an interview about my work in prisons, because I was bringing yoga to prisons at that time, and I was speaking about that. And then I was asked a question, and I just answered it, which was about my own motivation and past. So I answered about my past, and then that became the title of the article. And that was in 2013. And that was very soon after I had this revelation within myself. That was like the final piece for me that healed my guilt complex, which made it difficult to function. So at that moment, when you speak psychologically, you could say there's healing, and there's sufficient healing for me to function very well in a society that's extremely dysfunctional. So when you talk about healing, well, I'm functional, I'm present, I can be present, so how much do you want me to heal before we can say that, you know, I'm healed? Of course, things still come up. I still have memories to process, and every time that means that there's something I need to work through, and there's a memory, and it's going to lead me deeper into something that I need for myself, and it's going to give me then, and it's going to bring pain, but so a lot less than before, because I don't need to suffer anymore. Mm-hmm. That's what's changed now. There's not really any suffering, but there is still the process that I have to go through that's not easy, that comes to okay, now I understand it, and once I have the insight, I have more clarity, and I have something else, you know, that's why I keep, you know, when I speak about this, it's never the same because I keep growing. But that growth now and that healing now, I wouldn't say that it's, you know, the healing, I feel when someone's functional and ready to speak, then
that's already a huge step.
Yeah, and healing is relative, you know. We can all heal. We can all stand to heal for the rest of our lives. That's spiritual growth, if it's spiritual growth that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Or is it trauma healing that, you know, at which point do we say that we're healed, you know? I don't want to say that I want to say that I continue to heal on the one hand, but I don't want to say I'm sick on the other hand either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can still feel the grief for the children that you've seen being killed. And,
for sure.
And isn't the guilt the hardest to deal with within that, what you experience within the network, the guilt to come over that,
of course,
to overcome that.
That is absolutely the hardest, and it is also the purpose of the perpetrators to make you do things so that you will feel so horrible about yourself, so that you will never speak, because either you become one of them and then you are just as guilty because you stay in that as an adult, and you lose your sense, or your innate sense of morality, of right and wrong. There's an innate sense of right and wrong that people have. And when you're in the network, everything is done to push that out of you, so that you're not listening to the little voice of conscience anymore, which comes from within, but that you become indoctrinated really into this belief that bad is good, and so you get indoctrinated, and that's either you become indoctrinated and you become like them and you lose your inner sense of morality, right and wrong, and you keep justifying your actions, and you keep what they're doing, and I feel is very much offloading their own trauma, but they have to do it again and again and again because it never gets offloaded without healing, so it becomes an addiction. And
a vicious circle too.
And a vicious circle. Or you do have a conscience, and then life is very, very difficult, because then you feel so guilty that the weight of this guilt is just keeping you completely down, suppressed. And that's the idea, of course, that you'll never speak out because you feel so guilty. And it's real, that guilt, because you're the person, even as a child, you went through that. So I experienced exactly what the perpetrators experience. That's, in the violence that is forced on you, and that you're being put in front of a no-choice situation where you know that, in my case, if I don't do it, it's going to be even worse for the victim, because that's what I've been shown right from the start, that if I don't do this horrible thing that I absolutely, is the last thing in the world that I want to be doing, if I don't do it, they're going to do it, but it's going to be done in a way that's going to make me regret that I didn't do it. That's the beginning of that training.
It's mind control training.
That's the mind control training for the Delta program, where you're being made into a killer. Well, and you have to kill in the network, killing, once you're in that deep, you could say, then killing is either for rituals, you have to do it, or, for me, I was not going to be trained as a killer, as a soldier or anything, but it's still a training that I needed to receive in case. So you're forced into this, the last thing on earth that you want to do, and however it's done, but in my case, it was done in this mind control training with, I was completely tricked into it, and then, I had to, so anyway, I won't go into the details, but it was so horrendous. And then, of course, I said no, I refused, and then I was made to regret that. So then there's your conundrum. Then as a child, you have to do it. So, but as you have to do it, basically all the abuse that you've suffered, all the pain that you've had to suppress because you had to survive, then suddenly they give you this one channel for releasing it all. And that is really what my book is about, that one channel that you're being given only in this network, to release all your anger that has been built up over all this time. Knowing that anger is the first instinct for survival. When you're being traumatized, that's to say, when your life is in danger, there's really in your system, naturally, instinctually, there's fight. You kill the opponent so you're free of him. You flee, you run so you're free of...
But you can't.
Neither of which you can do, or you freeze, meaning that the body goes into a hormonal state where you're absolutely, your blood flows more slowly, so that in nature you won't bleed out. But also, there's this natural analgesic, so that you're basically completely high, so that you won't feel pain. So just imagine that in that state you get sexually abused, for example. Well, there you are. You're feeling pleasure, potentially you're feeling pleasure, and you're numbed from any pain that you might be feeling. So in sexual abuse, you feel that you are now complicit, because you're feeling something. You're probably being made to feel that you're complicit. But the first response, the fight response, so it is the first instinct. So it's not as if every time you're being traumatized, that first instinct isn't there. It's just suppressed every time. Now that instinct is used in the network as a channel. You're being given one way to let go of all that built up anger over all the abuse you've suffered and all the humiliations you've suffered. Here you go ahead. So when you're being put in that situation, unfortunately, you may feel a release as well. You may feel a release. It's the last thing on earth you want to do, and yet you're feeling the release. You're feeling the high that the perpetrators also feel.
And I think that's what readers sometimes struggle with, because they want to read and learn about satanic ritual abuse and organized sexual abuse, and then they have this this preconception of, oh, it's all horrific and it's all bad and it's all pain, and you just feel hatred for your perpetrators. And yet if you read your book, there's the mix of all the emotions and also feeling compassion or a connection to the people that abuse you. As strange as it seems, that was also the case, and it is something that I think some people are struggling with.
Sure. Well, you may think, first of all, you may think that I'm excusing the perpetrators because I'm still attached. So no, there's no excuse, and there's no me getting out of, putting responsibility where it belongs. They are responsible for their actions. And there's nothing to be done about that. But what I don't want to do is to fall into the division is guided by the network. The division between us is guided by the network. And for the network, it doesn't matter who you hate, as long as you hate. And that causes a division. And then we're doing exactly what they want us to do. So I want to go farther. What I was speaking about is, okay, I've gone through these same things, so I understand. But I'm, of course, very different from the perpetrators, because I've made different choices my whole life.
You were rebellious, and that's how you were able to get out.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I was rebellious, and then I survived.
Subtle.
And then I survived by chance. By chance, it was not like, well, I did have the near-death experience, which is also...
You were almost killed when you didn't fully obey the orders that were given to you.
Exactly. You have to obey 100%, and I was not a good slave in that sense, that I was not... My obedience was not complete.
Are they all slaves in the network? Are they worse off, in a sense, than the people outside of the network?
Well, I did not feel that anybody was free, but the one person that I did meet, who was clearly the most powerful person in the network that I met.
Do you want to say his name, or?
Well, I don't have to, because we're not... well, that was a Rothschild. It was a Rothschild, and it felt like that was the most important person. He was clearly the most powerful in the network. And that felt to me, there was something there that I couldn't even grasp, in sense of how much power this person had, and the idea of freedom that conveys. There was something that I really couldn't grasp, and that was not a pedophile. He's not a pedophile.
Can you explain that? what makes someone a pedophile and what makes somebody not a pedophile?
Well, a pedophilia, I think, is a reaction to child abuse that you've gone through yourself. And then for some people, they just are drawn to sexually to the children of that age in an attempt really to become the one in power in that moment. So that, you know, when they felt the oppression of the abuse and all the feelings, the horrible, negative, painful feelings that are part of being victimized, if you don't heal, coming to the other side of that, the sexual attraction becomes literally a magnetic pull to get over your child abuse yourself, to come to the power side of your child abuse yourself. And so if you experience, say, sexual attraction for children, the first thing you have to say is, this has happened to me. Most pedophiles even know that themselves, that they were sexually abused as children, but they don't connect it. They say, well, it happened to me, so it's okay for me. But often, because of the dissociation as a survival mechanism,
Can
often
you explain that? What
in a minute, yeah. But let me. The pedophiles that don't even know that they were sexually abused as children, you were not born a pedophile. You know, that's clear. Okay, no baby is born a pedophile. Babies are born innocent. There is no sexual. There's nothing sexual about a baby being born. That baby is innocent. So once that baby or that child is compromised sexually, so the sexual abuse, first, this is a trespass. There are natural boundaries of children and their innocence that you do not cross, you do not touch. So when there's a trespass, in that child, there is fear, is the first reaction. Now, if this is a person that you love, that fear has to be suppressed. So it goes to freeze, right? And then in that freeze state, the abuse happens. But what also happens is that the child's innocence, the state of innocence, that's to say, living in a state of joy, existing is joyful, my existence is joyful, I am joy. That's done. And now it's cut off. Now you have lost what it means to be human and alive and natural and joyful. And now the message is given to you that in order to be loved and in order to get attention, you need to be sexual. Now, the perpetrators are the people that believe that stay in that state of that child, who has to believe that this parent who abuses them also loves them. So that parent is right. That parent is correct. So there's an indoctrination that the sexual abuse is okay because the person I love does it to me. So that's the indoctrination of the child who believes that sexual abuse is okay because it's coming from a person that they love and they have to accept it anyway. They have no choice. That's the mindset, really, of a pedophile. And that is really the mindset, when you go deeper into it, in the network.
And a parent can also be a handler.
Absolutely.
Or a grandparent.
Of course. That's usually how it works. Mm-hmm. Now, my mother had sexually abused me, but she became my pimp, so to speak. Because, so when I was speaking about the Rothschild being not a pedophile, not everybody in the network are pedophiles, but pedophiles are the easiest to manipulate. Mm-hmm. Because they're easiest they're obviously easiest to have in your pocket, you know. You have material on them and then there you go. They are yours and they are under your control. And I felt that the Rothschild person, he had a certain ease about him that was extremely, for me, this moment, this meeting was so important, and I was completely sold in that moment. You know, I saw the lies afterwards, but in that moment, he was extremely aware, extremely observant.
Charming to you?
Very.
Respectful?
Yes. No pedophilia. No, nothing untoward.
What was your age? How old were you?
9.
And he took an interest in you?
Well, I was there basically for my owner, my handler, to get approval from him to create the persona that he wanted to make of me, which was going to be, you know, certain fame and everything. And I believe that the Rothschilds must have gotten a cut from all the sales that would have happened, because if I was famous, then of course I was a high-paying elite sex slave, or then later prostitute, but slave, because that money would go to my owner. But then I believe that the Rothschilds must have gotten a cut, and so they had to give their permission also. That was like the final stop.
Interesting world.
Yeah, so the process of dissociation, yeah?
Please, can you explain what happens and when it happens?
Absolutely. So it depends on each, of course, each child has different ways of responding to trauma. And in fact, in the network, it is very important when in mind control, children even get tested on their ability to dissociate. That's to say, to completely leave the body and, you know.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, for the network, it's good because those children are more easily programmable. But I'll explain from my personal experience that this dissociation, so when you're being abused, there's different ways of responding, but a child that is going to be completely present and feel all the pain, and that is not dissociating, that is, the perpetrators don't want a child like that, because they don't want to see the pain in the child. You understand? The perpetrators don't want to be reminded of what it is that they're doing. They don't want to see a reflection. So if a child feels pain, unless it's a sadist and he wants a child to feel pain, but you know that. But usually, in the network, they seek children that dissociate, and this is a way of responding to trauma that very naturally, when you go in the freeze state, so you can't fight, you can't flee, you're freezing, but in the freeze state, it goes farther in that you can just completely not be present because it is too overwhelming. That's really what it is. What is happening is you're scared to death. It's so overwhelming. Your spirit just whoosh, and you know, sometimes spirit can go somewhere else and you can see what happens at your body, which I've also experienced. But sometimes it's as if you're in the void, and which I also had a lot, the dissociation, where you're just completely gone and you don't know what is happening to your body, even as it's happening. It also depends on the perpetrators, because children are so attuned to adults. So children grow up pretty much in expectation of the adult. So what the adults are expecting of the child is so important as to how a child grows up. So with the sexual abuse, there are perpetrators that are dissociating. There are perpetrators that are... Have you ever been pickpocketed, for example?
Someone stole my purse. Yeah.
So there's an energy that comes with pickpocketers, and usually...
There's an intuition, a warning.
Well, there might be a warning, but there are pickpocketers that try to create the idea that there's nothing to worry about while they're pickpocketing, and you have your warning, and then they're like, no, I'm just the normal person walking by, and you're like, oh, it's just a normal person, and they steal something of you. There's a, I mean, I don't know if that was the case with you, but anyway, there's a vibration, and the child tunes into that vibration. So if the perpetrator wants the child to, certain perpetrators, they're like suggesting strongly that nothing is happening, and so you can be on the surface, you can be...
It's almost like hypnosis.
Yeah. Nothing's really happening, but in the moment it's happening. So there's not even any way that this abuse that is happening is entering the conscious mind. You see, it just goes immediately to the repression. It goes immediately to the dissociation. It never happened. The other thing is that if in the beginning, it can be dissociated afterwards, because you cannot, this has happened. Now you're soiled. You lost your innocence or whatever, but also, who are you now? Are you, because, in my case, I was told you're a whore. So who am I now?
And you were 6 years old.
I was 6 years old. How am I going to go to school thinking that I am a whore? I cannot live with the shame of believing that I'm a whore and then go to school and show my face. I cannot show my face anywhere. I'm too shameful to live. I can only be a whore in the network. And then there's the programmation to make sure that you will not speak. So, but that also makes you forget, because it's the things that happen are so awful that, you may be told, this never happened. This never happened. My mother, nothing happened. She was perfect, so nothing bad was happening to me. So being in the mindset of my mother, nothing could have been wrong. Nothing could have happened. So I was not allowed to believe that something had happened to me or that something was wrong. So in my mother's mindset, that became my denial as well, my dissociation. So sometimes it happens right in the moment, which is what the network is looking for, the children that dissociate well. Mm-hmm. Because once you're dissociated, you're a blank slate. And so in mind control, the blank slate that you become when your spirit is out of your body, your consciousness, I should say. I don't know what it is, your spirit or not, but it's your consciousness is not there. Mm-hmm. That is used, that state is used to program. From that place, there's nothing that exists. You're a newborn baby. From that place, a new part is created that is specifically created for a specific purpose, specific to the network, specific to the
role,
the sick purposes of the network, like one part that is for one type of an abuser who likes one type of particular thing, like a menu almost, Then there's one little part that does one little thing. Now, I was trained differently, but that is how, I was trained to be one persona. So it was a little different. I was not going to be 1,000 different little parts for different perpetrators. I was going to be one persona for one kind of perpetrator.
But these memories, the more traumatic, the more likely that it's stored somewhere in your brain where you can't access during the daytime when you have to go to school. And it also, from what I understood, makes it that once you're out of the network, because you have to function, these memories are so far away, tucked away, that it takes some time. It takes a certain relaxation for them to surface again. Or
it takes safety, the emotional safety. For what they do in the network too, to make sure you remain dissociated, is there's a lot of programmation. So when you start to remember, there's a lot of suicide programmation, for example. And there's a lot of what is called fog programmation even, so that when you start to, all programmation is based on natural trauma responses. So one thing I have to say about the people in the network, they know trauma through and through. They're real experts, and
they know what to do.
They really know what they're doing.
And it comes
They
out
don't know anything about healing, but they know everything about trauma and trauma responses, and they know how to use those and manipulate instinctive trauma responses to create a program into you and to make you do something out of a survival state. They're really, really expert in that. And so again, the dissociation is enhanced, you could say, with all the programmation. So there's a fog program where the natural state of disbelief that I was talking about before, like, this can't be true, I don't want this to be true. But then there's fog programmation where you say, I don't know if it can be true. This can't be real. And there's a different vibe to it, but it's a program to keep you in the mist, literally, to keep you completely sort of floating and uncertain and unbalanced and just not knowing it. I don't know.
But in your case, you also had scars on your body from the torture you had to endure, and later on, when you talked to the investigators in the true case, you pointed out perpetrators, and you were able to give inside information.
Yes.
So
I spoke to Michel Clip, who was one of the original interrogators of the. He wasn't interrogating the ex-witnesses, but he was doing. He was getting the information from the other policemen, and he was verifying. So he, when a survivor would say, "Well, we drove 20 minutes from that place, and we were in a place that looked like so-and-so," then he was looking on the map and measuring, and he went into those places, and he found those places, though, and he was able to verify a lot, enough for him to say, well, they're not just making it up. And of course, he was part of that original investigation team that was fired. But he kind of continued. Some others did too. I think Patrick de Baats tried. But I spoke to Michel Clip, and then what he did is he gave me he showed me pictures. Mm-hmm. And I just went boom, 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 boom. And, I recognized them right away.
Were these famous, well-known people?
Or? No, well, I didn't know anybody. When I was little, I didn't know anyone. I wouldn't have recognized a politician from TV when I was 6 years old, That's not what I would have been watching or paying attention to. So I personally didn't know anyone, but I did recognize faces of my perpetrators. Sometimes I recognize the faces of perpetrators very easily. Sometimes there were reasons why I didn't see the faces or recognize the faces. There was other programmation sometimes. The German doctor would say, "What does this mean?" And then his face became to mean that I was strangling and I was dying. Mm-hmm. So his face, when I first saw his face, I thought, I don't know him. My thought was, I don't know him. And it was such a strong thought. I went to then investigate my reaction to go back to that programming. But as far as Michel Clip, he was showing me pictures. And then also based on things that I knew and just remembered and told him, he was able to sort of place my testimony later. Of course, much later. This was much after, years after the Dutroux case.
So Dutroux was already in jail by then.
Yes. Yeah, this was rather recent.
To go back to the dissociation and the way the memories are stored in the brain, and that you need safety, you said, for the memories to come back to the surface, and you get these flashbacks, which at
the flashbacks, were just coming. I don't know if there was any emotional safety, because the flashbacks in and of themselves were coming, but I had no place.
No context.
No context, also no place, no safe place with them. Yeah. So it wasn't until I had a therapist who I felt safe with, that I finally was able to go into them and then, you know, integrate them, integrate these memories into my life, and then that integration creates, you know, an overall greater well-being over time. Mm-hmm. And there is an insight that comes, and clarity that comes right away, in my case.
Right. The fact that these memories sometimes come years later surface, that is used to discredit survivors.
Right.
They created a whole theory about it, the false memory syndrome.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit how that reasoning works?
Yes, it's very interesting because in the United States, false memory has been largely discredited now, that whole movement. First of all, Elizabeth Loftus. Elizabeth Loftus is she's a research psychologist. She's not a clinical psychologist, so she never worked with patients. And she was studying the effects of, she was studying false memory originally for accident victims, for insurance cases. But she never studied trauma, and she certainly never studied anything regarding sexual abuse. But in the late 90s, she suddenly became very interested in that subject specifically. And she did a study. She basically had her student create a very small study that was, first it was that student's 14-year-old brother. That older brother and his mother told him four things that had really happened, banal things from childhood, 4 things that were real and 1 thing that was false, and it was called the mall study, because Lost in the Mall study, because it was the false memory that was given to this child was that when he was 5 years old, he got lost in the mall, and then he was found and he was brought back to his mother. So we're not talking about sexual trauma, just let's be very clear. That's the study, okay? No sexual trauma, not even trauma, just a moment. And an older brother and a mother that are telling that 14-year-old something that he believed. Of course, why would he not believe it? So this false memory is often used by perpetrators telling survivors that nothing happened. My mother was creating false memories in me because she was saying, and this is, by the way, written about in the book, at one point I was covered in bruises because I'd been beaten up. And I was at home, but people were visiting. And so my mother said that I walked into the swing.
Mm-hmm. And got hurt. And
I got hurt because my brother was swinging, my brother hit me. And then she implicated my brother in that memory, that false memory. And then after a time, and then people were coming and she kept repeating that. And I wasn't going to say, oh, well, no, really, I was being beaten by a perpetrator. And, you know, I was not going to say that, obviously. There's the shame again. And I'm like, definitely not. So after a while, I started wondering, did I walk in? Because my brother he wasn't saying this didn't happen. Because children are so vulnerable. So this Lost in the Mall study has this element of false memories are really put into survivors by perpetrators for the opposite reasons. So you have this going on with the 14-year-old. So then she wants to make a bigger study. So she got 24 more people, another student of hers, to create this slightly larger study with people from 18 to 60 in the study. But always there was a family member, a parent or an older family, who was telling them about these memories, basically same as perpetrators telling you this didn't happen. So creating a false memory. And that student that developed that study, he went on to do his own stuff. He he didn't support Elizabeth Loftus and what she later did when she really turned against survivors and made it. This is not applicable to sexual trauma. First of all, it is it is not the same thing. And his study, which was his thesis work, he basically said nobody believed it at the end because there was no follow-up. You know, it was right after they were told that this was, you know, there was no follow-up. It was a very small study.
Mm-hmm. But they used it regardless.
And then this became very big, and then other studies like it were done, but basically it does not study sexual trauma. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, Elizabeth Loftus, when she speaks, she looks like she's in a FOG program all the time. When you say, but survivors, this and that, and she'll say, but I don't know. I don't know what they're saying is real. She looks like she's completely in a FOG program. And again, so strange that she's studying this and then it just gets applied to this, to sexual abuse. And then I think the mistake, if there is a mistake made, because Jennifer Freyd is a psychologist. She was already a psychologist. She privately accused her father, who was a famous mathematician, of sexually abusing her when she was a child. Her father and mother started the False Memory Syndrome Foundation.
So it comes out of the same network more?
I don't know
probably.
If they're in a network or not, but it comes from people that are denying the sexual abuse of their daughter, who privately accuse them and make it a public thing. And then Jennifer Freyd came up with the term DARVO, is deny the response to victims coming forward of the perpetrators. That is, DARVO is deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender.
Oh, right, yes.
That's Jennifer Freyd came up with that. But she is a respected psychologist, and she continues. Her parents started the False Memories Foundation. And then what happened is all these pedophiles came on board of this False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and they got the media, and then it became a huge thing. But the reason that it was started was because in the 80s, there were a lot of reports of what they then called satanic panic. You know, there's another reason to make it all sound very ridiculous and very unbelievable, and they take a few aspects and then they make it seem ridiculous. Right. And that's what they do with me too, you know.
They take out the most grotesque parts. For someone that is not familiar with what's really going on, they think that's so outrageous.
That's right.
It can't be true.
And then they take something that's grotesque, exactly, and they say, ha, 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 ha. Come, let's all laugh with that. And then you're laughing at the victims. And when you're being asked to ridicule someone, then you have to wonder if there's mind control going on. Mm-hmm. When you're being asked to scoff at someone and think that they're stupid and think that they're whatever, in our case, it's making up stories. So I noticed that lately the attacks have been very low level, like she's a liar, and then boom, 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 and then many, many, many comments on videos like I'm just a liar, or I'm just a confabulator. Like, I love that word, confabulator. So it's very low level, but then on the other hand, they'll say, well, this is real, but it's really sad for the real victims because Anneke Lucas, obviously, she's traumatized, obviously, but not these perpetrators. So that, you know, and I know I speak very specifically about the psychology of this. So I can imagine that my voice, because of that, can get people to think about this, and then but then I get, you know, singled out as, well, this is real and there's real victims, but she's not a real victim. You see, that's very typical for what the network brings to this.
And another thing is also that they always find an excuse not to investigate cases like this. And if there is a team investigating it, it is stopped. And this was also the case in the Marc Dutroux file. So if there's nothing to investigate, if it doesn't exist, why can't they thoroughly investigate claims like rape or murder, as they would do in other cases. So it's almost like it's a pattern that they always have to hide something.
Yeah, and I've never been on that side because, you know, as I said, I went to the police once, you know, 20 years later, and it was like, I don't think so. I don't feel that this is the way to go. It doesn't feel safe at all. And I'd been obviously programmed never to do it, but also been programmed never to speak out. So I just wanted to be careful. But I thought, okay, if I'm ever going to speak out, then I have to do it. I have to be ready for it. And then I have to calculate, you know, always calculate risk versus effectiveness. Mm-hmm. So a lot of us, you know, a lot of us survivors, we're not really afraid of death. We've been faced with death a lot. And so a lot of us are not really afraid, and we would gladly die for the cause, I think, if it was worth it. If I could tomorrow say something that was just going to spread around the world immediately and everybody would then know and accept it, then I would gladly give my life for it. And a lot of us think the same, but we just know better that we would give our life for nothing.
In the beginning, you spoke a little bit about your mother. And I think this is something that people are struggling with to understand how a mother can, well, bring her girl to the network. You were 6 years old. But there was a certain motivation for her as well, or a certain background that...
It's a certain motivation, but, you know, my mother was mentally ill, but that's not to say that there's not a lot of mothers that either sexually abuse also and also, you know, sell their children. I wouldn't say that this is a real mother, but my mother was not a real mother. She was mentally ill. I think she was a psychopath, who knows what you would diagnose her as, but she definitely had was undiagnosed of something. And you know, she was born before the war, and I know her mother died when she was 5, and clearly she acted like a girl that was sexualized. So she was sort of the ultimate, like when you think of a toxic patriarchy, then she's the ultimate product of it. She was the woman who completely bought into all the lies of the sexualization and all the lies of, you know, she really wanted to please the men and the authorities, which was a big motivation in terms of the network, because she knew that these were important people. And for her, she wanted to belong. She wanted to climb. She wanted to be part of these important people. That was her motivation. But because of her presentation of her particular craziness, because not that the people in the network aren't crazy, but because I don't think she would have been considered safe for them, because she was so eager to boast that she knew these important people. What she was already doing with, you know, the one person who was her contact person was a countess, so she was boasting always about her, you know, friend and her, you know, connection and so forth. And she did also, believe it or not, I was 6 when she put me in, but she had some belief, some insane belief that I was going to marry a rich man. That came up a few times. And, but at the end of the day, she herself was just emotionally completely immature, and either pleasing men in any way possible. She would get humiliated by men, and then she would let that out against me. And then part of her MO was that she would get in revenge mode, and then that was the punishment, that she would take me back to the network. And there's quite a few, you know, there's quite a lot about my mother in there. But I found out, you know, the book sort of ends, and it's the last time I was taken to the network, but really I was taken one more time after I was rescued. My mother was so angry that she ended up getting me back, sneaking me behind, I was not supposed to be used in the network anymore, but she got me to one more situation. I was daytime with some, with a few aristocrats, and they talked about me, and they talked about it. They talked about the fact that I was not supposed to be used anymore. Mm-hmm. And from that, one person said, I don't want to be part of that, and left, taking 2 others with him. And then I was left with the 2 who didn't care. And I was still abused, horrifically. But it was very strange. It was the one time somebody said, I'm not doing this, but it was against the network rules. And that person even felt that my mother was using them to do her dirty work for them, which was kind of true. She kind of did little herself, but she just put me in these situations all the time where I was going to get incredibly hurt, mm-hmm. And maybe killed. So he said she wants to do our dirty work for us, and left. And that's how I found out, that because that was discussed, that it was free. I was free because I wasn't supposed to be used anymore. In other words, she wasn't being paid that time.
Mm-hmm. When you were in touch with your mother as an adult, when you were out of the network, in what regards did that relationship help you to heal and to overcome the anger maybe that you did you feel anger too?
Yes, but that's a very important question, because a lot of people that I work with, and I work with a lot of survivors now as a survivor myself, but a lot of people, the key really to if there's organized abuse that you've suffered, then you need to know how you got in there, and usually the parents are the key. So if you don't believe, which is understandable, you have the narrative of the parents, and for me the narrative was my mother was perfect, and she was, she was a cool woman, and she was a friend, because she said we're friends. So I was completely in her story, in which her story, nothing bad ever happened to me. But then how that changed for me was I told her about the sexual abuse, the rape of the first pimp that took me, because he had raped me also. And I told her just about that rape of that pimp. And she was completely silent. And it was on the phone. I was already living in the US. And she was completely silent, and I thought she heard me. And then some weeks later, she was just casually speaking, and then she was also casually mentioning this person, and it was a casual mention of them coming to her house, and said, didn't you not hear me? And she got very defensive, and she's like, well, and suddenly I realized, oh my goodness, my mother, her reaction is very suspicious. And this was really the first beginning into undoing this narrative that I'd been in about my mother. And that led to, finally, my mother had abused me when I was an infant. And, these memories, you say they're in the brain, but I don't know where the brain is, because they're in my body. And I did yoga, and I was, what was happening is, every time I did a headstand, I was just a complete wreck for the whole rest of the day. And I had this incredible pain in my loins and in my ankles. And for months, every time I did a headstand, I was on the floor. And it was so hard to even get through the day for the rest. It was just under this incredible, heavy blanket of emotional pain. And and eventually, I had the memory of being held by my mother, who changed my diapers, of her angrily, the anger from her, feeling it like knives as an infant. You don't have any reference. It was like knives coming at me in this anger, and her picking me up by the ankles and then roughly changing my diaper because she was so, she was single also, she was angry to change me, and then basically being too rough and angry, and then also inserting her finger at the same time, and there was just all this horrendous pain. And then there was also some sexual response also, which then became like, that's good from that young age. Like, she loves me because that's good. And so there was a connection made there. So in a way, because she was incestuous, and she abused me later as well. She abused me at 11. She also sexually abused me. You know, my mother had no limits. There were no limits. But the way she presented, and as a female psychopath, I think she presents as very pleasing to men. Maybe, you know, over-sexualized, but today who isn't? You know, it's like become so common. So she was flirtatious with men, and she was pleasing to men. And she was maybe, for the village where we lived, in the time that we lived there, maybe her skirts were a little shorter.
Right.
Maybe that. But other than that, not really that obvious.
Yeah. Well, you went through this whole process of healing. You've already touched upon it a little bit, but it was a long process, which I can imagine.
It's your life, let's just say that.
Right.
There's nothing else. Like, once you start in that, you know, there were probably about 15 years where I was thinking, when is it going to be over? When can I start with my life?
Right.
Because
do you feel like you started with your life?
yes, I started with my life, yeah.
Okay.
But there's a point where you have to say, okay, this is my life.
Right.
But I wasn't living, you know, a normal life in the sense of I was barely functioning, but I was functioning. I was little jobs, but I was bad at them. And then I would get fired. And then once I started doing the work in therapy, it wasn't better, because then it was even harder, because then I could barely move and I still had to go to work. So it was really difficult, because the world isn't set up for you to be surviving and healing from extreme trauma, especially not the United States. So life was so hard, and I kept thinking, when is my life going to start? When am I going to be healed? And of course, every memory that comes, you say, this is the last one. There's nothing after this. I don't want anything more. And it has to be done, and I have to be able to start with my life, whatever it is. Don't even know anymore. And then comes a moment of acceptance that, well, this is my life. And then that acceptance, as with the healing, the acceptance grows. And okay, then when I started speaking, I was working in the prisons, so then that was my life. I started to work in the prisons as service. Like, I've healed a lot, and I've had a lot of privilege to be able to do this, really.
Explain a little bit what you did in the prison.
I went to, you know, I started teaching yoga, which I was always doing. It was always very helpful for me. It was like physical therapy on the physical level. And of course, brought me back in my body, you know, the consciousness back in the body, which was completely, you know, as a young girl, it was like nothing from the head down, you know, there was no consciousness. So I was not even aware of my own, I was dissociated. But then yoga brought me back in my body, but then it really brings you back in the present moment. And then the meditation practice gave the overall perspective, really, of which is impossible to go through this level of abuse without the spiritual perspective, which brings it back to you in that it ultimately, and I say this for me, I would not say this for others, it's my responsibility. Ultimately, I got what I wanted. Ultimately, it was a hard life. Yeah, definitely a very hard adult life, but it gave me the answers that I wanted. I learned what I wanted to learn.
What was that?
Well, I wanted to learn, apparently, to really fully understand how I could not love. You were developing in love more and more, and I could not love and understand people who would hurt or kill children. That's where my love ended. I said, no, not that, get rid of them. And apparently in this life, I had to really understand those people as well. And of course, the experiences that I went through, I was being made like them. So I have everything, we all have everything in us to understand everything. And we all have that same darkness in ourselves. Mm-hmm. So that's where I don't want anybody to fool ourselves, because if we're in division, then the network has us exactly where they want us. Mm-hmm. And having that understanding obviously doesn't mean let them get away with it, right. Excuse them and, let's be nice to them. That's not at all what it means. It just means, do we want to become like them and say, now we're going to kill all those people, and now it's on our turn to have the power, and then we're just going to create a new power paradigm that is no different. If we're becoming God and saying this person should die and this person should live, then we're them. They don't, in a way, I have compassion, mostly because the healing has brought me in contact. The rebellion was my link to spirit, if that makes sense, in a little way. Was my rebellion, my not being the perfect slave, was me having a sense of being human, mm-hmm. which comes from being worthy of being loved, and which also means that I'm more than the body. Right. I'm me, and that's not just this body. That's why I can face death. If I'm a few times I thought I'm going to be killed now, but it doesn't matter. So that's where I transcend my body. And that's in the network, it's life or death. So I had to face fear of death and say no anyway, and then because we are more than that, because that would be better sometimes. Sometimes it's better to give your life and have a good death than to be alive and be a coward. Mm-hmm. That is true. But being a hero does not mean getting into a part and pretending to be a big hero and saying that you're going to save all the children and that you're going to, be a patronizing to all the victims out there. And that's not what it means. It just means to be really honest with yourself and know yourself more to be more than just the body, and the invisible support as you gain in courage. In the healing takes courage, and the courage is what the perpetrators don't have. They've always gone along. They're slaves because they've always gone along with the perpetrators, and it's led them to the ultimate the Satanism, which is the lie. It's all about lies. But if you choose for the truth, and if you have that honesty inside of you, and it does take, integrity. If you follow that, that's spiritual. If you say truth is more important, that's a spiritual path right there. And that grows, because then when you make that choice where you have no guarantees at all, but you're saying truth's more important, then you feel, then somehow that providence comes to your aid and you're being supported from beyond. And increasingly you can trust that. Mm-hmm. And increasingly that's what's real. That is what's real. So then you become less afraid. And that's what we all need to do, I think. And obviously we need to understand what is happening in the world in order to move beyond it, because we can't be in denial and dissociate and just keep saying that this is not real, because then we're doing the network's bidding. They're saying this isn't real, people, or we're not. But I want to say that the reason it's important that we know it, and it's not for us to be falling into depression and this darkness and, oh, now the world is so horrific. It's not what I thought at all. It is, the reason that we have to know it is because if what politicians are saying, and if we're voting for people and they are doing for us what we want them to do, things would be getting better and better and better. That's clear.
And they're not.
There's enough for everybody in the world. There's no need for poverty. It's more than greed and corruption. There is because if all those people are greedy and corrupt, then they still have choices, and they still could. Somebody with billions could suddenly do something really, really awesome and make a huge change. But there's a reason why they can't, because they're stuck. They're stuck in a network that has stuff on them, and that's why they have the riches. And I'm not saying everybody, but enough that they keep the control, and that's why things are not getting better. So we have to go to the source of the evil to understand what's happening before we can make a change. And then, yes, it can be depressing to accept it. It can be difficult, it can be painful. And that's the courage that each person needs to see the truth. But then from there, new things can arise within yourself, and then also in reflection in the world.
These are insights that you also share in your workshops. So maybe it's good to close off with talking about that a little bit.
Yes, sure. Well, when I was in the prisons and bringing yoga to people that are incarcerated, it was very important to not teach yoga in the way that I was taught it. And if I was going to be present with people in a therapeutic way, it was very important not to make the same mistakes that all the people that I saw made. So I thought, well, how can, going into the prisons, how can I be completely present with someone so that, because, in the jails in New York, this is a cultural, it's a class thing often that people can't pay bail. So they end up in jail because they don't have the $300 to pay bail for a misdemeanor. And so how I come in looking very privileged, so how can we connect? How am I not another condescending provider that comes to tell them what to do? And they're being told what to do all day long. How are we going to connect from the heart? So it's to be very aware of power dynamics, but use those little things that are not spoken. So I wanted to find a way to be fully present with people from the heart, because that's where you're on even terms when you're in the heart. Then there's no power difference, there's no power abuse possible then. You're just in honesty with each other, and that's where things melt and heal. I'm sitting with you, not trying to heal you at all. I'm just sitting with you, and I'm really there. And I've probably gone through something similar, because of course people in the prisons and the jails, they went through a lot of trauma, a lot of it similar to mine, with the violence and so forth, and the sexual abuse as well. And so I can be fully present with it. Not only am I present with what happened to them, really, really fully present, but I'm also present with how I healed from that, and that my journey of healing is then what I have to offer in my presence. Because I know, and they know that I know. Mm-hmm. And from there came the unconditional model, which is a healing modality that everyone can use to use power dynamics, because there's a power structure, and that is toxic, because the power abuse comes from trauma, unresolved trauma from those abusers who need all that power and status because they're not healed, because they don't know that they're... Hello! Hi! Hi, Poos. The people at the top of this power structure that want to keep the control over others, basically because they cannot control themselves, there's like these triangles of power everywhere, in big ways and small ways, but it basically has to do with the boss that needs to be the boss because they need to feel better about themselves than they really are. And on the other side, when we look and give our power away, we're just projecting power onto somebody else. We're admiring them, but maybe we're also giving our power away. So we're putting ourselves in the role of children, whereas they are putting themselves in the role of adults. And it is to go through these. We all have our own version of that, in that we give our power away and we look down on other people. And so our own unique version of that is how we use it as a lens into our own trauma or unresolved, emotional needs, or there's something underneath that. We're going to go under it. And then the model is really using things that I found really helpful, such as parts work, because, dissociation creates parts. And then everybody has parts, so you don't have to be unconscious. Everybody has parts. That's accepted science. So we can use the parts on every level. And I find it really, it's really that. I've developed my own adult self through parts work, that I can connect with these parts, the voices inside of me, as the little child that is really having a thought or a feeling and that's coming through. And then learning to really observe that, and then find, I don't need to necessarily speak to a therapist now to heal, because I do have my own, I'm strong enough within myself, like adult enough within myself to go there. Although, not to say that I don't get help. I do, I do get help still, of course. But it's to really create that, and that's the unconditional model, and that's the new part, is the lens through power dynamics. So we talk about power dynamics in terms of the world and externally, and what we see, and how does that operate really, and then on a personal level, it's how do we unconsciously replicate it, because again, division. That's the greatest tool of the psychopath. So when we judge someone, when we project down on someone, then we're in division. So that's why, again, I want to say, if we're being invited to ridicule, to laugh at somebody, think mind control, because that's suspicious. There's never any reason to ridicule somebody. That's not respectful. Why would you, so does it make you feel better and smarter when you're ridiculing someone? So then you're projecting down, and when you're projecting down, you're participating in that division. It requires for you to feel superior, to do that in that moment. And then what we do is we look at that is a part that is looking down, that's just accept that there's a part in yourself that's not been accepted yet. And then we go and look for that part in ourselves that is not accepted yet.
How can people reach you?
Well, I have a website, that's just my name.com, and easy to find.
Thank you so much for your presence and your insights and sharing your experiences with the world.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go on.
Een beetje, ja. Allee.
Dank je wel.
Het is een groot plezier.